What's up, Twitch singers and YouTubers out there? I am Gutter underscore FTW on Twitch. Let's go ahead and go into the setup of VoiceMeeter Potato, geared for live playback with a professional ASIO sound card. So we'll jump right into it. Basically, here is your main VoiceMeeter window. Okay, so you have the ability to breed and mix your sound exactly how you need it for a single or multiple PC setup quite easily. So we'll start with your A1 device. So when you select an A1 device, it becomes the master for VoiceMeeter, and VoiceMeeter will use that as its master control for everything. That sound card then becomes the engine for VoiceMeeter. With that said, my particular setup, I'm using an ASIO Focusrite Claret interface. Okay, so you select a master device, which I've done. So that is now our A1 device. These are the hardware outs. Anything that you select up in the top right corner is going to be a physical device or a device that has been installed on your machine that can be utilized within VoiceMeeter as an output, either hardware or hardware. So in our particular instance, all I'm using is a single interface, just my Focusrite. So we are going to run with that. But with that said, the very first thing and the most common misconception is that, oh, okay, I set an A1 device here, and then I need to actually pick a device from the list from my sound card. That is incorrect, and that will cause additional latency. So the way you actually would do this with a professional audio sound card is to go to Menu in System Settings. Once you have set that first A1 device, you will be presented with a new option in your actual system settings of VoiceMeeter. That ASIO device will show up in this list as the first out A1 as we've selected it, and then it will give you options where it has N1, N2, etc. Okay? So the inputs of your interface are represented by numbers. Those numbers can be stereo or mono. If they're stereo, then it would be 1 and 2, 3 and 4, etc. But with a microphone that's made for vocals, it's a mono device. So if you're using a mono device, you only need to patch. You can natively patch your inputs from your interface right here in this screen, and no additional configuration will be needed. This is very important because you do want to patch your native inputs. That way you get the lowest latency possible and the least issues. But with that said, my interface is using just a single microphone in the first preamp. It does have 2 preamps, so if I wanted to, if I had a guitar or some sort of other analog piece of equipment that needed to be jacked into my interface, I can map it here. As you can see, I've mapped the second mono channel into N2, so if I had something plugged into the second port on my interface, it would now be coming through this second channel. But I don't, so I'm going to unmap that, like so. And once you've set this, you're pretty much done if you have a single microphone. This number will correspond with whatever number the actual channel is on your interface. Okay, we're not going to go too in depth into the other things in here, but I will say this. Once you map this ASIO device, you will no longer be needing the MME, WDM, or KS buffers. You are now only using the ASIO buffer and the ASIO SR. So a very important point that the developers of VoiceMeeter have brought up is VoiceMeeter doesn't fully support any buffer rates below 128. And we're going to jump into audio latency and resolving pops and clicks and any kind of other issues on our next video in this series. Okay, so if you want your ASIO sound card to have full control, you leave these buffer and SR options as default. That way it just takes whatever your sound card gives it. And that's pretty much it as far as the configuration of the actual system settings. So we'll move on here. So we'll talk about the main interface. So the main interface, each hardware input, which are separate from the hardware outputs, have separate controls for where you can send them and some certain effects that are built into VoiceMeeter. So you have a compressor with makeup gain, and you have a gate. And the gate is very important if you want to make sure that your microphone mutes when you are not speaking and there's a bit of ambient noise in the room, like fans. You can hear my fan slightly in the background, right? Well, if you don't have a gate on, then that fan will continuously come through. Okay. Now you'll also see that I have the mono button selected here. And the reason for that is my microphone is a mono device. As you saw in the settings, I only mapped one channel. So if I turn this off, all you hear me in is the left speaker. So we don't want that. So we turn this back on, and now you can hear me in both speakers. It duplicates the audio to the 1 and 2 channel of the stereo output of your A1 device. Okay. And that's the gate. So you have the ability to route anything that you select as a hardware out into the playback of that device in each one of these hardware inputs. So when you select any of the A channels in any of these inputs, it will play back the input into the output of that hardware out. And those are the basics of the A's. This corresponds to not only the hardware inputs, but also, in particular in VoiceMeeter Potato, the 3 software outputs. So you have software outputs as well. And these are the built-in virtual cables that come with VoiceMeeter, and they're controlled with the virtual ASIO device that VoiceMeeter installs. And the engine for that is running off of your A1 device. So everything is controlled off the master, as we said earlier. Okay, now, here's where a lot of people get tripped up. The B's. So the B's are your virtual cables outputs. As you can see here, I'm sending my microphone into B2. So these B channels correspond to the 3 channels that I have here in the virtual section. Okay, so you'll notice that there is no representation of this meter in these meters at the top, these small meters. That is because these are a representation of the virtual cable's output. The input side of these channels is shown in the bottom right section, the master section. So if you were ever in a situation where somebody was like, hey, I can't hear you, then you would want to reference what is happening in the bottom right section. So in the bottom right section, you could see on my own screen that the playback of my microphone is happening in A1 and also B2, which is how we have it selected here. So what you need to know about the Bs is that VoiceMeeter VIO is B1, VoiceMeeter aux is B2, and VIO 3 is B3. So it goes in order 1, 2, 3. And you can also see that I have the A1 selected across the board. And that is so I can hear the playback of anything that's happening in any of these channels into the monitor of my Focusrite interface. That way I will be able to hear it no matter what. Okay, so let's move on. We can play any of our devices back into the input of our virtual cables. All right. Those are basically the basics of the actual configuration, the main configuration of VoiceMeeter in the most simple form. One microphone, one headset, routed into each section. So I'll get into why I have a few of these other things selected in another video. This is mainly because I have a second PC that does all of my audio streaming. It'll be a third video for the tutorial of VBAN, which is basically VoiceMeeter over IP addresses. You have a separate EQ for each of the masters. So if I right click this, you get a full 6-channel EQ in each section, and then you can configure it the way you'd like in your monitor, which for me is A1 because that's playing through my sound card, and then you can copy these settings as needed over to the other channels, but ultimately you have separate control over each EQ. You also have separate volume controls. I have some of these meters mapped to my keyboard so that I can move sliders on my keyboard up and down via MIDI commands in order to have quick access to Windows volume or even microphone volume right here on my sliders. And that is done with the MIDI mapping. You can map your MIDI devices to control certain functions in VoiceMeeter. Very powerful feature. You also have separate equalizer, a 3-band equalizer on each virtual cable that you can utilize here with these dials. So if you need more bass, you can add a little bit more bass, reduce some mids, anything that you need to do here. I will also point out, as a Twitch streamer for Twitch Sings, their natural encoding rate is 48,000 hertz. So when you go into menu and system settings after you have mapped your ASIO device, you now have the option to click on this ASIO device and it will bring up the driver control panel for the device. We'll go into why I have this buffer size set this way in our next video about latency. But this is also where you set the sample rate. So I recommend a 48,000 sample rate across the board. So when you, as the master, and as long as you have this set as default and preferred main sample rate set to 48,000, it will follow anything that you have set in the driver of your interface. Okay. OBS, or Streamlabs OBS, has the ability to capture the audio device without actually needing to send it back into the virtual cables. So when you capture audio in OBS, it's going to have a certain number of audio devices at your disposal. So you can see here when you install VoiceMeeter that it gives you 3 audio device options. In Potato in particular, it gives you 3. If you're using Banana, it will give you 2. More than enough than you'll need. Okay, so just remember that VoiceMeeter VIO B1, VoiceMeeter aux B2, VIO B3. So B1, B2, B3. Also corresponds to the recording tab. The recording tab is the input. So if it says output, it's actually an input. So this is the output of the input. It's like a male and female. So we have B1, B2, and B3. And as you can see here, my default device is set to B2, the VoiceMeeter aux. And that is because I have the aux channel selected as the output for my microphone, along with my native headset output. Okay. Very important you understand that. Also, another thing, you need to make sure your sample rates match. This will make it the easiest to configure and make sure that you do this without problems. So, by default, you need to go in to the properties of your sound devices and make sure that the default format matches across the board. So 2-channel 24-bit 48,000 hertz is my particular instance. And you'll want to make sure that those match on both sides, playback and recording. That will give you the least issues without needing to do some math. I'm not a math guy, so that is probably the best bet, to be honest with you. It is possible to run higher sample rates and bit rates. You just need to make sure that, in my experience, that the sample rate that you select fits inside of whatever higher sample rate. So, if you do a calculator and do 48 plus 48, you'll see that that's 96. So if I wanted to, I can use a sample rate of 96,000 because 96,000 is a multiple of 48,000. But if I was using 44.1 for my sample rate, you would know that that does not fit in the 96. So you need to make sure that you understand that. So 441 plus 441. That's 88.2. That's not a typical sample rate that you can select. I may be able to do that in my driver. So it has 88.2 as an option. So that may actually work. But we're going to stick with 48,000 because that is the main encoding rate for Twitch. Okay. So that pretty much covers it. You don't really need to know much else except for one thing. So there's a hidden feature, well, I consider it hidden, in the VoiceMeeter where you can right click on the actual meters themselves and set a limiter. And as somebody that sings and needs to hear the full output of their interface, it becomes important to make sure that it's limited in order to protect your hearing. So there'll be some cases where you'll play something on YouTube or you'll play something on Spotify, something like that, where it will just blast your eardrums out and you need to just throw your headset off. Well, in order to counteract that, you find the uncomfortable amount. As an example, we'll put in -16, and you'll see that if Windows Audio happens at anything above -16, it will just stop it right in its tracks in order to protect your hearing, just in case it's too loud. So there's that. Any questions, comments? Please leave them in the space below. Happy to try and help answer anything that you got. We're going to cover buffer rates and audio latency, pops and clicks, things like that, and how to diagnose them in our next video. I appreciate you taking some time with me today. I apologize for any blank spaces there. I was trying to space out the audio so it would be easy for you to take in the information because it is a lot, and I appreciate you taking the time. Thank you so much. Have a good day.